Continuing from our previous discussion on mental processes and behavioral patterns, we now delve deeper into the fascinating realm of consciousness and conceptual thought. We're moving beyond just what happens in the mind to explore the very nature of being aware and thinking abstractly. So let's start by defining our terms. The text uses mental quite broadly, not just thoughts, but any process that involves sorting events into a qualitative order, like how we experience things subjectively, distinct from the physical sequence of events. Think about it. This mental sphere is way bigger than just what we're consciously aware of. It includes stuff happening in simple animals, things we have no reason to believe they're consciously experiencing, and even responses in our own bodies triggered by stimuli we weren't even aware of. So, mental isn't necessarily conscious. Up until now, we've mostly talked about the general quality ordering of all mental events, whether you're aware or not. But now, we need to zoom in on what makes some mental events conscious. What extra ingredients are there? Now, defining consciousness itself is notoriously tricky. Like trying to define the absolute quality of redness, it's hard to pin down what it fundamentally is. Maybe it's impossible. So the author wisely suggests we change tactics. Instead of asking what is consciousness, let's ask what does consciousness do? Let's look at the differences in behavior when things are processed consciously versus unconsciously. Before diving deep, three ground rules seem pretty uncontroversial. First, we can use this conscious-unconscious distinction for others too. We know the difference between deliberate actions and reflexes in ourselves, and we use that to judge others' actions. Second, consciousness isn't black and white, it's a spectrum. There are shades of gray semi-conscious states, where it's tough to say if something is truly conscious. Third, conscious events really nail those mental attributes we talked about. They're highly modifiable, intentional, well discriminated, and even more generally discriminated than other mental phenomena. They're the VIPs of the mental world. Okay, so how do we tell conscious behavior apart from unconscious behavior that still looks coordinated and intentional? Think about driving a car while talking on the phone. You're doing multiple things, maybe not fully conscious of every gear shift or muscle twitch, but it's still a complex, seemingly coordinated act. The text proposes three key criteria, provisionally, for conscious behavior. First, reporting. Can the person tell you what they did or are doing? This means using symbols, language, gestures that others understand similarly. This isn't just about communication. The ability to communicate forces a level of clarity and precision. Language, especially, connects us to the accumulated knowledge of our species. Second, taking account. Can they juggle different conscious experiences happening at once? Like driving, talking, and noticing a billboard, integrating these simultaneous streams. Third, guidance. Are they guided not just by what's right now, but also by mental images, memories, expectations? Consciousness allows looking ahead mentally. What about memory? Can we remember things we weren't conscious of at the time? Turns out yes, and learning happens preconsciously too. So, memory or recognition isn't a good enough criterion to distinguish consciousness from unconsciousness. It doesn't get at the core difference. But thinking back to taking account, this leads to a crucial idea: the unity of consciousness. All the things we're conscious of feel like they belong together, part of one continuous stream. Unlike unconscious processes, which might run independently in different brain areas, we generally have one unified consciousness. Think of it like having one main TV screen versus multiple screens running different shows simultaneously. Also related to this unity is the narrowness of consciousness. At any given moment, only a limited amount of information can be fully conscious. The rest might fade into the background, becoming semi or subconscious, but ready to pop back into focus. This unity of consciousness has a really important consequence. It means all conscious experiences exist within a single, shared spatiotemporal framework. Everything we perceive, feel, imagine gets slotted into this common timeline and space. It's like they all live in the same city, with addresses and timestamps relative to each other. This shared structure allows for the highest degree of generality in how we classify and evaluate things within consciousness. We don't just distinguish a red apple from a green banana, we relate it to all other conscious experiences, perceptions, memories, feelings, etc., within that unified frame. The sheer comprehensiveness of this relational network, connecting everything conscious, is probably the most characteristic feature of consciousness. Now, this comprehensiveness doesn't mean every tiny sensory signal automatically bubbles up to the conscious level. It's more about the top level of the hierarchy being incredibly interconnected, acting as a central hub. Many things connect through this hub. Because of this unified spatio-temporal structure, we constantly maintain abstract representations of the background, the overall spatial and temporal layout of our environment. Think of it as the invisible stage upon which the spotlight of consciousness shines. These background representations are usually taken for granted, but they're always there, co-present with whatever we're consciously focused on. A great example is that dizzying feeling when you suddenly realize the floor isn't there anymore. When your assumption about the background solid ground is shattered, your whole conscious experience wobbles. It's like realizing the mountains you see aren't just floating. They rest on an invisible, vast landscape that defines their positions relative to each other. Let's talk about attention. This is super important because it's so tightly linked to consciousness, but it's more than just being awake. When we pay attention to something, it's different from just being aware of it. Attended experiences are perceived in much greater detail. They stand out more clearly against the backdrop of consciousness. We're also much better prepared to react appropriately to them. Think about focusing on a specific word in a sentence. You notice its spelling, its nuance, whereas other words blur into the background. But here's the catch: attention has limits. It works best for things we expect or anticipate. If something totally unexpected pops up, even if you're trying hard to pay attention, it can still sneak past unnoticed, like a sudden loud bang startling you, even if you were concentrating. Attention is always tuned to a particular type of event we're expecting. How does this attention magic work? Well, according to the text, when we perceive something, say, the shape of a door, our brain starts preparing for what might come next, the continuation of that experience. The relevant neural circuits get excited, primed. Then, when the actual stimulus arrives that matches the expectation, it lands on this already hot circuitry. This makes the signal stronger, allowing it to activate more connections in the network, leading to a richer, more detailed perception. It's like having your radio dial already slightly turned to the right frequency. The station comes in clearer. This anticipatory state is essentially our readiness or set to perceive things in a certain way. Interestingly, similar preparatory states can happen semi-consciously or subconsciously. You might be searching for your keys without actively thinking about it. But when you see them, you instantly notice them because your mind was predisposed to look for them. Hypnotic suggestions work similarly too. Attention is key because both attention and consciousness seem to rely on these pre-existing excitatory states in higher brain centers. It's not just about the incoming signal, it's about the brain's internal state. The text hypothesizes that conscious processes might need continuous support from internal signals, maybe from a central vigilance system. These reinforcing impulses, driven by our expectations, prepare the ground and decide which incoming signals get the VIP treatment, full attention and consciousness. Once a stream of thought or perception gets this boost, it tends to dominate the higher processing centers, potentially pushing out or ignoring other signals that don't fit the current focus or aren't strong enough to break through. So, consciousness seems to involve a limited set of coherent processes, all tied into that unified spatio-temporal structure, woven together by abstract relations and deeply connected to our communication tools, allowing for sophisticated classification and social understanding. Now let's tackle a classic philosophical distinction: concrete versus abstract. Usually, people think sensory experience gives us raw, concrete data, and then our minds derive abstract concepts from it. But the author argues this is misleading. It stems partly from the old idea that sensations are like perfect copies of external objects, and the mosaic theory of perception built from fixed elements. If perception is fundamentally an act of classification, What we perceive must be properties that objects share with other objects, properties defined by our past experiences and classifications. We never perceive something in isolation. We always interpret it, placing it into a category. If something entirely new appeared, emitting novel signals, we wouldn't perceive it at all. We'd just have a jumble of unfamiliar impulses. So, what we perceive are really just indicators of class membership. These perceived properties aren't inherent in the objects themselves, but are relations our nervous system uses to sort things. Our entire knowledge of the world is built from these theories or classifications, and all experience is essentially about refining or changing those theories. This means we never perceive everything about an object, not even most of its physical properties. We only perceive certain aspects relevant to the classes we assign it to. And guess what? Even basic sensory qualities like color or pitch are abstractions, learned associations between stimuli and responses. Remember Gestalt perception? We see wholes, configurations directly. Often we perceive the overall shape without consciously registering the individual colors or lines that supposedly make it up. We're perceiving the abstract Gestalt itself. Okay, so our initial sensory classification is a bit rough around the edges. It doesn't perfectly mirror the real world. Experience teaches us this. Things that seem similar might behave differently under new conditions, or things that look different might act identically. This forces us to revise our initial classifications. The mind performs a reclassification, but this time it's working on the elements of the classes formed by our senses. Through repeated experience, we start grouping things based on deeper, explicitly known relationships. For instance, we learn that apples and oranges are different from bananas, not just because they look different, but because they behave differently in various contexts. These newly formed, higher-level classes, based on conscious understanding of relationships, are what we typically call abstract concepts. So, forming abstract concepts is really just another layer of classification, happening at a more sophisticated level than the basic sensory distinctions. Why do we keep reclassifying? Because the first pass from our senses is just an approximation, often a poor one, shaped by evolution, biology, and practical needs. It's not accurate enough to predict the world reliably. This constant need for refinement pushes us towards higher levels of classification. Could it be that even logical thought and inference are just another step in this process? Perhaps logical principles, like theories of classes and relations developed to analyze reasoning, are directly applicable to this multi-level classification mechanism. The text suggests we're dealing with a hierarchy of classification. Basic sensory grouping, then forming abstract concepts, and maybe even logical reasoning as a further level. The core idea is that, despite the apparent complexity, all these mental processes might be governed by the same fundamental principle: repeated classification within a network of connections. This underlying unity is the central claim of the theory presented here. So, how do we know if this theory holds water? A good theory, the author argues, should explain existing facts using known phenomena, help eliminate confusing problems, show older theories as special cases, or suggest new experiments. This classification theory aims to do just that by showing how various mental functions, discrimination, generalization, abstraction, conceptual thought, all emerge from the same basic process operating at different levels within a neural network. The hierarchical structure of this network also allows predictions about how brain changes might affect mental abilities. That wraps up the main theoretical exposition for now. The following chapters will likely explore how this theory stacks up against empirical evidence and delve into some philosophical consequences.